I found a great essay, and it explains my, you know, general tenor towards Christianity. Although Tim Maroney notes that other religions can contain moral and ethical flaws of a similar magnitude, so you know, anyways, but this I think I side with entirely. Honestly, I'm completely convinced by this piece. I'm not a Christian. In my discussion of this fact with Christians, I've repeatedly run into a major misunderstanding. The Christians assume that if I believe the Bible were true, I would become a Christian. That is, they believe that my reason for not being a Christian is that I don't believe in their God. That is not. This is not the case. I will explain clearly why I'm not a Christian. This essay is not meant as an attack on Christianity, just as a statement of personal belief, although no doubt some people will receive it as an attack on Christianity. One disclaimer through this. The thesis of this essay is that even if a God as described in the Bible does exist, he is not fit for worship. Consequently, I speak sometimes as if I did believe the Bible when in fact I do not. If I had, and let me clarify something, Tim may have wrote this, but this statement is the sentiment expressed in this, I echo. I have the exact same sentiment. If I had undeniable proof of the existence of Yahweh, aka Jehovah, aka Adonai, aka El Shaddai, aka Yahweh Elohim, the father of Jesus and of the ancient leader of the Semitic peoples, I still would not worship the bastard. If an angel appeared to me and performed some miracle, as far as I'm modifying this, he says removed his Abdi star, I don't know, changed my eyes into blue, turned them blue, so that I could never again deny the reality of divine power, I still would not be a Christian. My primary reason for not being a Christian has nothing at all to do with my lack of belief in their God. My primary reason is that the Bible is a disgusting book describing the behavior of a God without the morality of the average high school student. I fully agree. This God does what he wants, when he wants, without even just an attempt at self justification, and all for what reason? According to Paul, all for his greater glory. For his own glory, he condemns billions to eternal torment, drowns millions of innocent beasts and thousands of children, and orders the slaughter of entire cities to the last man, woman, and child. Creates a race he knows is flawed and will hurt itself, refuses to deal with any other god on a friendly basis, and rains doom on those who dare to try to be as knowledgeable as he is, and so on. Jesus' preaching in no way atones for Yahweh's many hideous crimes, lest we forget that it was at the time of Jesus that he created hell, this cruelest of concentration camps, for certainly far worse than the ones created by the Nazis, was at no time mentioned in the Old Testament, and the wrathful, threatening God of the Old Testament would hardly have admitted any chance to terrify his worshippers. Incidentally, the soul of the Old Testament is simply a generic term for the afterlife. Neither modern scholarship nor Judaic tradition equates it with hell. I've heard some Christians who believe that there is no ever burning hell in their religion, that the lake of fire is purely destructive, that the sinners will be annihilated rather than tortured at the last judgment. Sometimes they claim that the medieval Catholics created the myth, and that they would revile any god who made this concentration camp. Well then, get ready to start reviling. You know, the myth of hell was not created in the Middle Ages. It is explicitly stated in a set of books called the Synoptic Gospels, the ones by Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Since some people don't seem to be very familiar with these books, usually considered the cornerstone of Christianity, I will fill them in. In Matthew 8:34 through 35, Jesus finishes up a parable about an unforgiving debtor with, and in his anger the master handed him over to torturers till he should pay all his debt. And that is how my heavenly Father will deal with you unless you in the east forgive your brother from your heart. Not clean killing, you will be handed over to the torturers. In the parable of the wedding feast, Matthew 22, 1 to 14, Jesus concludes with, Then the king said to the attendants, Bind him, hand and foot, and throw him into the dark, where there will be weeping and grinding of teeth. The king didn't say, Execute him, but bind him and throw him into a painful place. This is echoed in Matt 24:51, in almost the same words, and again in Matt 25:30, again with similar words. Finally, for Matthew, we have Matthew 41 to 46 on the last judgment. Next, he will say to those on his left hand, Go away from me, with your curse upon you, to the eternal fire for the devil and his angels, and they will go away to eternal punishment, and the virtuous to eternal life. My point is thereby proven. so I won't bore you with the quotes from Mark and Luke. However, check out Mark 9:43, Mark 48 through 49, and Luke 13:27 through 28, and Luke 16:23 through 26 if you still have doubt. Why would Jesus have so frequently mentioned the existence of an afterlife of torment if that was misleading his followers? And why did he never imply the existence of the forthcoming? Why did he never imply the existence of a forthcoming destruction of the unfaithful? Among the Christians who accept the reality of hell, another rationalization is quite popular. This holds that hell is in some sense voluntary, created and chosen by its inmates. It's an interesting idea, and certainly one of the more interesting aspects of Dante's Inferno is the way that the conditions of the damned reflect the conditions that they created in life by their sins. I agree completely the man that commits murder must live ever in fear of attack, that the thief will never feel secure in his property, and that the liar can trust no one, and so on. By their offenses, they create an unpleasant life for themselves. However, you don't have to hurt anyone to get into hell. All it takes, according to scriptures, is knowing about Jesus and not accepting him as Savior. It doesn't matter how virtuous you are, how much good you do, how happy of an environment you create for yourself and others. Given this, that the voluntary entry argument does not make any sense. The same argument could be used to justify the sending of erring opponents of Nazism to concentration camps. They voluntarily chose not to give homage to Hitler, so they chose to be interred. Why should we blame the Nazis for the inmates' choice? Why should we blame Yahweh for the choice of the damned? Genocide. You hear a lot of Christians about Yahweh's infinite compassion and mercy. Tell it to the Midianites. Numbers 31 is a classic example of the wholesale slaughter and rape under the direction of Yahweh. A sample of this tale. They waged the campaign on Midian as Yahweh had ordered Moses. They put every male to death. The sons of Israel took the Midianites women captive and their children and plundered all the cattle, all their flocks, and all their goods. They set fire to the towns where they lived and encampments. Moses was enraged with the commanders of the army who had come back from this military exemption. He said, "Why have you spared the life of all the women? So kill all the male children, kill all the women who have slept with a man, spare only the lives of the young women who have not slept with a man, and take them for yourselves." Yes, friend, that is his infinite mercy and compassion for you. I particularly like the way that Moses got upset with him for sparing women and male children, but allowed the young girls to be kept for later raping. If only humans could be kept to such lofty standards without the necessity of divine revelation. This is not the first time Moses harassed the Midianites, although it was obviously the last. Earlier in chapter 25, to be precise, Israel settled in Midian. Rather than toss the Hebrews out on their ear from this land of limited resources, the Midians, well, I'll let the author of Numbers tell it. The Hebrews gave themselves over to the debauchery with the daughters of Moab. They invited them to the sacrifices of their gods. Then the people ate and bowed down before their gods. With Israel thus committed to the Baal of Peor, the anger of Yahweh blazed out against them. Yahweh said to Moses, "Take all the leaders of the people and impale them for Yahweh here in the sun, and then the burning anger of Yahweh will turn away from Israel." Moses said to the judges in Israel, "Every one of you must put to death those are the people who have committed themselves to the Baal of Peor." Now that it's written in a rather negatively connotated fashion, look at what actually happened. Israel arrived in Midian. The Midianites welcomed them in like kinfolks. They let them date their daughters. They let them come to church. They right neighborly reception, if you ask me. Some of the Hebrews, no doubt impressed by the friendly ways of these people, took up the local customs of their own free will. So what did Moses do? He put spears through them and lets them rot in the sun. Who's the bad guy here? I'd say it's fairly obvious. Neither apostasy nor fornication deserve the death penalty. Or do you think we should start frying unwed mothers and those who leave their religion by federal law? Right on the heels of this comes a plague. This is blamed on the Hebrews and on one Zemiri, who had an incredible gall to actually marry a Midianite woman. Fortunately, a zealous son of Israel speared them right through the genitals, and the plague went away. Now we moderns know that disease doesn't work this way, but more important objections, but what concerns a point of biblical trivia. Of what nationality was Zipporah, the wife of Moses? You have 5 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's right, she was a Midianite. But for some reason, Moses' genitals were around to remain intact. This makes a marriage to a Midianite seem less like a capital offense. I don't think the firstborn in Egypt during the captivity would have agreed with the verdict of compassion and mercy. Yahweh could have teleported the Jews out of captivity without bloodshed or put the Egyptians to sleep while they left, but no, that wouldn't be gory and exciting enough for him. Now rivers of blood, killing innocent children. That's something you can really sink your teeth into. It was due to Yahweh's hardening of Pharaoh's heart in the first place that made all the later cruelties necessary. And why? Yahweh explains to Moses in Exodus 11:9, Pharaoh will not listen to you so that my wonders may be multiplied in the land of Egypt. Wonderful. Deep sarcasm there. All those children and adults tortured and killed for the same reason that would lead one of us today to set off fireworks. This is a morality, plain and simple. The entire book of Joshua is a long sequence of atrocities. I have not given all these quotes for space reasons. I urge you to look them up for themselves. If you are not shocked, then your moral standards must be low indeed. Of course, you will sometimes hear rationalizations of this slaughter. There are two major forms, the corruption argument and the mercy argument. The former says that the slaughtered were evil and deserving of their fate, and the latter says, since they were religiously incorrect, it was a mercy to terminate their existence. The corruption argument simply does not hold up. The people slaughtered in the Old Testament were almost uniformly blameless, with a few exceptions, of course. For instance, the Sodomites violated the conventions of hospitality. Usually, no justification is offered beyond the fact that since they were of another tribe, it was okay to kill them, and it goes without saying that the hordes of the slaughtered children were innocent. As to the mercy argument, they shoot horses, don't they? However, people are not animals to be destroyed against their wills in the name of mercy. If I don't claim to be suffering and I don't ask to die, neither you nor God has any right to decide that you know better. If a person tried to do this to me, I would take up arms against them and shoot them. If a god tried, well, I would withhold my worship. Most of us, given omnipotence, would be able to do a far better job than Yahweh. What would you do if given omnipotence? If your answer is anything other than abolish world hunger, there's something more than a little skewed in your perception of mankind. There is no question that this is the greatest evil in the world today. The second thing would be to abolish disease, right? That doesn't take infinite mercy, just normal compassion and a bit of common sense. God's supposedly infinite mercy is apparently the same thing as no mercy at all. What makes this particularly unforgivable is that by even Jesus' own standard demands feeding of the poor. See Matthew 25:35, in which it's stated that the blessed feed the hungry, and that the damned do not. Yahweh is held blameless, though, for not feeding him. Does the old saw about practicing what you preach not apply to Yahweh? Is his hypocrisy not a sin? Usually when I bring this up in a discussion, someone says, no, it's the evil of men that's to blame. They have lots of money and keep it to themselves rather than feeding the poor. This argument uses a double standard. Men are held guilty for not feeding the poor, while Yahweh is held innocent for doing exactly the same. In fact, it would be far easier for Yahweh to feed all the poor than for any man to feed even one. Men are certainly not blameless here, but it is Yahweh who is the true villain. One popular rationalization of this is that for Yahweh to feed all the hungry, and it's never explained how, would somehow make it more difficult for people to get into heaven. Sure, and another reason would be that it would make the quality of the newspapers worse, right? You can say that two things are connected when there's no apparent or explained link between them. Well, you can, but you'd be making a fool of yourself. Another rationalization is that the life without, quote, challenges would be boring and dehumanizing, so Yahweh doesn't remove them. The fallacy here is grouping all challenges together. I personally lead a very challenging and satisfying life, but I've not lately had to flee any volcanoes or earthquakes, go without food for a week, or suffer the ravages of some disease. I would be quite happy, in fact, if I do not have to face such challenges as those. There's plenty of room for the amelioration of the human condition without making it dull. Another objection here is that the same people who like this rationalization usually believe that they will enter a world that is perfect and with a challenge without death, but they don't seem particularly put off by it. So that doesn't make sense at all. Other gods. Suppose you were a god and that there were other gods. What would you do? What I would try to do is the same thing I do among people. Try to make friends or truce with as many of them as possible. The jealous Judeo-Christian God does the opposite. Some people feel that Yahweh is the only God and therefore cannot be faulted for not having friendly relations with other gods. This idea is a fairly modern invention, and not only is he the best God, but the only one. Yahweh is repeatedly referred to as our God in the Pentateuch, which I don't know how to pronounce, and there are no applications until Isaiah that he is the only real one. Also try Deuteronomies 5:7-9. It is psychotic to be jealous of non-existent beings. The statement, "You shall have no other gods by me," clearly implies that the contrary is possible. However, I'm willing to grant that there are no other gods for the sake of the argument. Suppose you were an omnipotent god and there were no other gods. What would you do? Perform a continuous sequence of verifiable miracles. After all, this doesn't require any effort and keeps people from delusion. No luck in the case of Jehovah. He demands absolute fidelity without any demonstration of its existence beyond some visionary manifestations of which the sort you can get from any religion. Christians commonly rationalize this in one of two ways. First, they claim there is virtue in believing something without proof, that is, faith itself is held to be a virtue, and that Yahweh doesn't want to remove our opportunity to indulge in it. All I can say is that I do not consider faith to be a virtue, nor do I, the reader of this article, to you. I also consider it myself, as the reader of this article, to be a sign of intellectual weakness and a significant barrier to scientific and other progress. There is no virtue of accepting anything on faith, and I believe this as well, since it may well be false. And it is clearly not virtuous to believe in the false. Given that one has faith, how does one decide whether to put it in Christianity instead of Hinduism? There is no way. You have to cross your fingers and take the plunge. Whatever choice you make, you will hear voices in your head, see divine manifestations, and so on. And so even once the plunge is taken, there's no way for you to know that you're correct. It has not escaped my attention that many of the same people who prattle about the virtues of PH like to talk about, quote, proofs, unquote, of various things in their religion, such as the resurrection of Jesus. Which is it? Do you have faith or do you have proof? Second, there's the rationalization of that the scientific discovery would become impossible if a continual stream of verifiable miracles were performed. This argument denies the omnipotence of Yahweh. If he can do anything, he can perform a sequence of miracles in such a way that to convince everybody of his existence and not interfere with scientific discovery at all. The only things he can't do are logical absurdities, such as making 2 + 2 = 5. The only point here is that if we do believe in him, if we don't believe in him, we go to hell. And this is a greater evil than the lack of virtue or faith or stunting of science or anything else conceivable. If Yahweh is concerned about the good, he will do what he can to keep us from hell, and withholding vital information from us is the exact opposite of this. Other charges. The charge is that of Yahweh infecting us with disease is pretty strong. God made these microorganisms and made us subject to them. If I had a bunch of plague germs and set them loose, you would rightly hold me accountable, since, according to Genesis, all life and disease comes from Yahweh himself. I hold him similarly accountable. A similar consideration rises with respect to the common Christian conception of Satan. This being was created unleashed by God, who knew exactly what he would do, that is spent his entire existence wreaking havoc and leading people into criminal activities. Suppose I were to build an evil robot that I knew would go around killing people. Whose fault would it be if I let it loose, mine or the robot's? Whose fault is devilry a tree in the world? The puppet Satan or the being that deliberately created Satan's evil? Yahweh deliberately acts to restrict man's capability for understanding. I've heard the claim that Yahweh does not restrict us from learning, that he encourages us to learn all we can. Tell it to the workers at the Tower of Babel. In case your memory fails you here, Genesis 1, 6-7 says, "So they are all single and without a single language," said Yahweh. They are all a single people with a single language, said Yahweh. This is but the start of their undertakings. There will be nothing too hard for them. Horrors. Oh no. Come, let us go down and confuse their language on the spot so they can no longer understand one another. So there he is, interfering with human knowledge. One criticism most frequently leveled at me when leveling these arguments is that I have no right to judge God. I disagree fundamentally. I believe I am entitled to this, and anybody who says otherwise is drunk on faith. I objectively do, and you can fuck off and die. I just did, and you can go fuck yourself. I have that right, and if you disagree, you can fuck off. I believe that it is divine justice that I have that right, and that anybody who disagrees is fucking delusional, period. I have that right, I assert it, and anybody who disagrees can kill themselves, because I disagree. If you've got a problem with it, put the gun in your mouth. Man, it is the universe model of many Christians. God is the definition of good. Huh, what a joke. All morality proceeds downward from him, so it makes no sense to apply moral standards to him. But I disagree. I think this is objectively false. He does not define morality. so I have every right to judge him. From the perspective of man trying to determine which versions of conflicting belief systems he did abide by, this argument makes no sense. Assume that there is some religion of an evil god. We call this the god of Satan for convenience. It's clear that adherents of this religion of Satan would see him not as evil, but as good. Someone who is a member of a religion of Satan might say, "But your God ordered the slaughter of innocents. How can you say that he is good?" The reply of one of the Satanists is likely to be, Satan is the source of good. He is the definition of good. He is far above us humans. It's thus nonsensical for us to judge him. That's why that's the only way to wiggle off the hook. Slaughtering innocents is obviously evil, so to save Satan, he has to be taken outside the normal standards of good and evil. Now suppose that the questioner of the previous paragraph is trying to decide which religion to join. He must evaluate the various religions available to him. In particular, he will try to avoid falling into the clutches of some religion that worships an evil god or evil spirit. However, no spirit says we are evil, shun us like the plague. All religions claim to be good, so we will have to use some standard to compare the various religions, and this standard has to be independent in any way of one religion. Otherwise, he couldn't even get started. All religions are best by their own standard. What standard is available for us for this necessary comparison? None is really ideal. The best we can say is that the religion is best which causes evil. The best we can do is say that religion is best which causes evil acts in its worshippers least, and in which apparently evil acts are not performed by the worshipped beings. Here he uses a common standard for evil: theft, murder, rape, terrorism, and so on are held to be evil. He uses a standard because there's none better, and because it's necessary to use some such standard to avoid becoming ensnared by a cult of evil. If we allow exemptions to any religion, then there is no reason not to allow the same exemptions to all the others. If we let Yahweh get away with murder, we must let Kali kill as well. This takes us right back to where we started, so we can't make exemptions in any case. The fact of the matter is that Yahweh and Jesus do not pass this test. There are murder, rape, theft, and terrorism all throughout their books. Sometimes Yahweh does it, sometimes people do it on Yahweh's orders, sometimes Jesus just sits around gloating about the fate of sinners in the afterlife. It's not an acceptable religion when you hold it to a moral standard. Furthermore, this unacceptability is manifest in the history of the religion, which is one of holy wars, intolerances, purges, vicious infighting, and general immorality. Now, in closing, let us see about how Yahweh, Jesus, and Jesus hold up to their own standard. In Matthew 26:41-46, we hear the king say, "Next he will say that to those on his left hand, 'Go away from me, with your curse upon you, to the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you never gave me food. I was thirsty, and you never gave me anything to drink. I was a stranger, and you never made me feel welcome, naked, and you never clothed me, sick in prison, and you never visited me.' And they will go away to eternal punishment, and the virtuous to eternal life. Yahweh does not feed the hungry. He does not give drink to those who thirst. He dispenses no clothes, and lets the faithful sicken and die. In light of this, Yahweh himself is the worst of all sinners. If there is no double standard, he will be at the head of that line into eternal punishment. He is guilty of almost every crime he accuses of the damned. I do not believe in the reality of Jehovah, except as a psychological phenomenon. But if I did believe, I would not worship that horror. It could send me straight to the hell it's made for those it dislikes, and if there were no other choice but worshipping it, I would walk in proudly." I feel the exact same way. Fuck you, Christians. Fuck your God. And by the way, if I'm condemned to a fiery hell, I would rather go there than spend my life in my afterlife with Pastor Steven Anderson. I'd, as spend eternity with Pastor Steven Anderson? No, thank you.